there, listeners. You're listening to I Don't Know Her, the podcast where we talk about women and some other folks that you've probably never heard of. You should have, and you will. As you can see, I am missing my partner in crime at the moment. Amanda is still battling COVID, and we cannot see each other, which is awful. Not as awful as what they are dealing with at the moment. So send all your good vibes and energy out to them. I'm sure they would love it. We decided to, since we can't record, we decided to put together a compilation of our favorite Native American people that we highlighted in our podcast. It is Native American Heritage Month, and so we would like to honor that. So we're going to put together some old episodes and kind of revamp them and pick out some of the highlights, and that's what we have for you. So thank you so much. If you're still tuning in, please hang in there, stay safe, stay healthy, and let's get through this.
I am going to talk today about Lyda Conley.
I don't know her.
She was the first woman admitted to the Kansas bar and the first Native American woman to argue a case before the Supreme Court.
Ooh.
This story is so fun.
Okay.
I'm excited. So Lyda was born Eliza Burton Conley sometime between 1865 and 1869. Birth date was unknown, so she's got like a 5-year window there.
It's a beautiful name.
Eliza Burton Conley. Her mom was Eliza Burton Zane Conley.
Whoa.
And her mom was a member of the Wyandot tribe, and her father, Andrew Conley, was a white British man. She grew up in what is now known as present-day Kansas City, Kansas. Lyda was one of 4 daughters born to the couple: Helena, who was called Lena, Ida, and Sarah, who they called Sally. And Sally actually died when she was a teenager. So these 3 sisters became really, really close. So Eliza hated the name Eliza, so she went by Lyda her whole life. Lyda or Lydy.
Okay.
So just so you know, now that we've got her mom had the same name, I don't know if that's why she hated it, but she
I was
hated.
going to say, what's going on there?
She hated being called Eliza.
Okay.
So sometime in her younger years, before the age of 15, Lyda's mother died and was buried in the Wyandot cemetery that was at the center of Kansas City, alongside Lyda's grandmother and their other Wyandot ancestors. Her father died a few years later, around 1885. And he was also buried in what was then known as the Huron Place Cemetery. Now, Huron, as a side note, I discovered in the course of this, we think of like Lake Huron, you know?
Yeah.
It was a name given to the Wyandot and like a whole group of tribes. And I found out that Huron is actually a derogatory name.
Really?
It had something to do with like wild boar fur or something. I don't know. It was real derogatory and like making fun of Wyandot people because of their headdresses that they wore for ceremonies. So just so you know, that's where that comes from. And so Huron Place Cemetery is still got the name on it, but that's no longer what it's called. So we'll get to that in a little bit. So there's not a lot of information about Lyda's early years in terms of like education, but I do know that she was very feisty and she was an extremely independent girl and very strong-willed. And they talked about how this would have been a pretty natural progression because the Wyandots were well known for having really strong-willed women. In fact, when they were being converted to Christianity during the 17th century, it was well known that the women did not take well to this Christian idea of inferiority or submissiveness.
Yeah.
And that
I'm not fond of it either.
Oh, I'm not. No, thank you. The Wyandot women had historically played really important roles in their tribe, and they had the power over naming chiefs, owning land, and they were the ones who ran the household. So it stands to reason that Lyda would be the kind of girl who was like, no, I'm not cool with that. And she did not take kindly to being told to take a back seat. So Lyda and her sister Lena did get an education beyond high school. They actually would row a boat across the Missouri River every day to attend Park College in Missouri.
Wow.
Lyda trained to become a telegraphic operator and eventually went on to teach telegraphy at the Spalding Business College.
So like sending and receiving messages, kind of? Okay.
Lyda, along with many Wyandottes, was a member of the Episcopal Church, which was the Christian version. And she was a really faithful person and even was a Sunday school teacher.
Oh, wow.
Lyda was friends with other women at the time who were well known as being like independent, strong-willed women, including a woman named Lucy Armstrong, who fought for widowed women to be seen as heads of the household and who was also a suffragist.
That's right on.
So it feels like she just happened to be in a whole group of people that were really independent. So Lyda Conley in 1900 enrolls in the Kansas City College of Law. And she graduates from law school in May 1902, just one of 4 women. And she passed the Missouri bar the next month.
Wow, in 1902?
Mm-hmm. And this, like, a lot of the sources I read really emphasize that this would have been a very unique, non-traditional way for a woman in Kansas in the early 1900s.
Yeah, this just seems like almost just unheard of.
Yeah, it totally was. So that's why it's like, I'm really trying to emphasize that she was like very independent, strong-willed, and opinionated in a way that was surprising. So, and she surrounded herself with other women who were like that. Lyda tried to make her living as a lawyer, but she struggled to find enough work to pay the bills. A lot of people wouldn't hire a woman lawyer. Mm-hmm. Even though she'd had a law degree, she was forced to return to working as a telegraphy teacher at Spalding. She did have a little bit of work as a lawyer. She mostly represented Native American people who had land disputes or contract disputes with people. But for the most part, she didn't get to really practice a lot of law. In 1906, Congress said the Secretary of the Interior could sell the tract of land that was located in the center of Kansas City that had been the historical burial ground for the Wyandotte people, including the members of Lyda Conley's family. This land was in a part of the city that was like the heart of it. Like, think about like if it was Riverfront Park in Spokane, like the center of the city, or where the Space Needle is in Seattle. Mm-hmm. So all of these buildings are being built, this like burgeoning like business district, but in the center of it is this little burial ground. And they can't build on the burial ground. So people had been trying to get that like overturned. So finally Congress says you can sell that tract of land. And the city had grown around it. It was on this like little bluff that looked over the Missouri River. So they said, you can sell this and the bodies in the cemetery are going to get moved. Lyda was like,
nope,
fuck that.
Yeah.
So late one night, her and her 2 sisters built a 6x8 little shack in the center of the cemetery, brought their double-barreled shotguns, put up signs threatening anybody who dared to trespass, and just occupied it.
Extreme. I like it.
So here's where we're going to put a little pause button and really explain this particular spot of land and how it came to be, because it's very important to what comes later in the legal arguments. So the Wyandottes were originally part of what was known as the Huron Confederacy tribes, and they covered the area of what is now present-day Ontario and Quebec in Canada. They were pushed out by colonizers, familiar story, and ended up in the lands of Ohio and Michigan. They controlled nearly 110,000 acres of Ohio that had been gifted to them by the U.S. after they helped become American spies during the Revolutionary War.
Whoa. Okay.
Yeah. So the U.S. said, in exchange for being our spies, you're going to get all this land. The Wyandottes were very well educated as a tribe. This was like something they were well known for. Lots of people went on to secondary education. And they were a very racially welcoming tribe. So the tribe itself was mixed, lots of mixed races between Native American.
They're so progressive.
Yes.
People.
Native American, European whites, and a lot of African Americans. Because they had at one point, there's a whole slavery thing that happened. And they were like accepting freed slaves into the tribe and giving them land. So this meant that a lot of the people who were eventually like, they couldn't trace their blood quantum.
Mm-hmm.
It was a thing.
Yeah.
So in 1830, Congress passes the Indian Removal Act.
Oh,
yeah.
Remember learning about that in school? Yeah.
So the Wyandottes are once again being told they have to move from this land that they were, again, gifted by the government. So the tribe negotiated with the government that they would cede their land in Ohio and Michigan for a tract of land that was 148,000 acres west of the Mississippi. So that's what they were supposed to do.
Yeah.
When the Wyandottes arrived on the bank of the Missouri River, in the area that they were supposed to be resettling in 1843, the government said, sorry.
Again?
Yeah.
Wow.
So they said basically, oh, we're not ready yet. So the Wyandottes...
Where are they supposed to go?
Right. The Wyandottes are on the east bank of the Missouri River, and they have traveled from Ohio and Michigan to come here, and they begin to die of disease.
Hmm.
Like, they're sitting through 3 seasons, and the winters are awful. So lots of them begin to die of diseases that were unfamiliar to them, dying from exposure to the elements, starvation, what have you.
It sounds awful.
Yes, it was terrible. But as was their sacred tradition, as people would die, they found the highest point in their encampment and buried them in traditional blankets in unmarked graves. And they said they know for sure that at least 100 members were buried during these 3 seasons.
It's a lot of people.
In this spot. And that meant that this cemetery was now their final resting place on this part of the river. So the tribe ended up negotiating a purchase of land from another tribe. So they went up to the Delaware tribe and they were like, hey, we're waiting on these motherfuckers. They're taking their sweet ass time. Can we buy some land from you? And so the Delaware tribe said, okay. And they negotiated a land deal. And the Delaware actually gifted them a couple extra acres of land too. So they set up shop in this little bit of land between the Kansas and Missouri rivers. Throughout the next 10 years, the tribe flourishes, builds their own city that they called Wyandotte City around this cemetery. The cemetery then became like the heart of their land. Mm-hmm. And they were building a real ass city with like a business district and stuff like that.
Wow.
Once again, though, the land in which they established their new lives became a hot commodity to white colonizers. And so they were like, oh, well, now that we know these rivers are here and you're building this city, the rivers had become like a trade route. And it was like when westward expansion started, this was one of the spots that people would stop on the westward expansion. So it became like a big trading center. And they were like, well, we can't have an Indian tribe here.
It's so painful, just the theft.
Yes.
Yeah.
And this constant betrayal.
Constant betrayal, yeah.
So in 1850, the federal government decided that the Wyandottes living in what had this Wyandotte City is Kansas City.
What?
Yeah. So Wyandotte City that they created and built is now Kansas City. So the federal government
I'm shocked. Sorry. I was like, I have no words. Yeah.
Yeah. Which is obviously it's a major metropolis in the Midwest. So the federal government looks at the Wyandottes living in Kansas City, and they decide that the Wyandottes had, quote, become sufficiently advanced in civilization. So this is real tricky. They look at them and they're like, look, they're prosperous, assimilated folks. Mm-hmm. So now we're going to take away their tribal affiliation and make them American citizens.
Okay, in what way is that going to not benefit them? Because I feel like that's an underhanded something.
Yeah, because if you no longer have tribal affiliation, you have no right to land.
Okay.
So they say, oh, you're sufficiently civilized, we're going to make you U.S. citizens.
Yay,
but... You're no longer Wyandotte citizens. You are American citizens. So that means that any treaty rights that they had signed in the past would be disappeared. So this new treaty that was signed on January 31st, 1855, required that the sufficiently civilized Wyandot would relinquish all their rights and status as tribal members. So one positive note, though, is that the treaty also said that the burial ground where Lyda's family's members were buried, quote, shall be permanently reserved and appropriated for that purpose.
Okay.
So even though the Wyandots were being basically eliminated as a tribe and losing all of their land, this one spot was supposed to remain a Wyandot cemetery. It's important to note that not all of the Wyandots were deemed sufficiently civilized, and not all of them who were wanted American citizenship. In fact, Lyda's grandmother, because Lyda's not born yet. This is before she's been born. Lyda's grandmother is like, I am not a U.S. citizen. I am a Wyandot, and I do not want to be a U.S. citizen.
Yeah.
And she refused. She was like, that's not for me. However, the government got to choose. They decided who was sufficiently civilized and who wasn't. So they marked her down as a citizen, even if she didn't want it.
Okay.
Yeah. It's real fucked up.
Really fucked up, yeah.
And so Lyda's grandmother and Lyda's mother was a child at the time, and she was listed as a U.S. citizen too. So at least 200, though, Wyandots were considered unfit for citizenship. These folks would then eventually be moved to Indian Territory in Oklahoma, where they reconvened as a tribe, and they became the Wyandot Nation of Oklahoma. The Wyandots who stayed in Kansas lost their right to tribal affiliation and membership according to the federal government, and eventually even according to the other Wyandot Nation. They were like, oh, if you settled in Kansas and became a U.S. citizen, you cannot be a Wyandot. The Cherokees did something similar to that, just FYI.
Mm-hmm.
When the Trail of Tears happened, as people were migrating across, there was this moment when a whole bunch of people escaped into Kansas. And then later on, the people who ended up in Oklahoma created their tribe. And they said, basically, if you can prove that you had a tribal member in your family, even to this day, 2019, if you can prove your relationship to somebody in the tribe, you can be considered a member. You can't get without blood quantum, you can't get rights and privileges, but you can at least be enrolled unless your descendant left the Trail of Tears and settled in Kansas. That's a literal stipulation.
Wow.
They had to be at the end in Oklahoma.
Yeah.
And that's basically what the Wyandots said too. If you remain in Kansas, you are not Wyandot. You are a U.S. citizen, not a member of the tribe.
Okay.
This is going to be obviously a very sticky situation when it comes to this Wyandot cemetery.
Yeah. Because it's right in the middle of everything.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So back to the Conley sisters and their guns.
Okay.
So Lyda and Lena have posted signs on all of the marked grave sites that say, "Trespassers beware." They threaten to kill anyone who stepped foot on their land. So this dramatic action obviously attracted a lot of attention.
Mm-hmm.
People all over the country were like, whoa, this is crazy.
Well, yeah.
And quite a lot of local women's groups in Kansas came to their defense. The women, like I said, she was associated with a lot of very independent women in the area. And so as soon as she started doing this, they were like, we're on your side. Lyda was smart enough to know that simply occupying the cemetery wasn't going to guarantee that it would be undisturbed. So on July 11th, 1907, she filed a petition for an injunction in the U.S. Circuit Court for the District of Kansas. Yay, she gets to be a lawyer. So in her filing, Lyda claimed that she was a citizen Wyandot. It's a very specific term. There's a dash in there, a citizen dash Wyandot, meaning I'm a U.S. citizen and a Wyandot. So she claimed that she was a citizen Wyandot and that she had legal right to the Huron Place Cemetery. She said that selling the cemetery violated the Constitution, the U.S. Constitution, which said that treaties were the law of the land. So the court, within 24 hours, basically rejected her injunction, saying in part that she wasn't a citizen of the Wyandot tribe, but a citizen of the U.S., and therefore she didn't have a right to argue on behalf of the 1855 treaty. And that the land was really owned by the Wyandots in Oklahoma, who were more than willing to sell the land and take the profits.
Okay.
This gets very messy.
Yeah.
But Lyda was like, I'm not giving up that easily. So just a few weeks after her case was dismissed, she filed a bill of exception and offered some amendments to her original claim. She said that because she was a descendant of the original people who signed the treaty in 1855, that she was actually a direct beneficiary of it, which is smart.
Mm-hmm.
She also argued that the treaty stated that the land would always be used as a cemetery.
It did state that specifically.
It stated it specifically. She also argued, somewhat controversially, that because the tribe had split, that the Wyandot tribe in Oklahoma was not a legitimate successor to the land and that they had no authority over the cemetery. She also said that authorizing the sale of the Huron Place Cemetery was unconstitutional because it was the taking of property without due process.
Mm-hmm.
Really good, solid legal arguments.
Yeah.
Smart legal arguments, too. And one part of her argument, which was brand new, was that the cemeteries of Native American people are sacred, something that had not yet been articulated in a court of law. So the case, Conley argued, ended up going all the way to the Supreme Court. It took 2 years before she was able to argue her case in front of the highest court. And in order for her to go there as a lawyer, and I'm pretty sure it's because she was a woman, she was supposed to have a lawyer in DC who would like sponsor her.
Okay.
To like prove that she was allowed to argue in front of the Supreme Court. But she couldn't find a lawyer in all of DC to
be willing to do that for her.
To stand up for her. So instead she decided, okay, well then I'm not going to argue the case as a lawyer. I'm going to argue the case as a plaintiff. So instead of her being the lawyer for the case,
she's bringing the case.
Yes.
Interesting.
So it now is like her against these people.
Mm-hmm.
So when she appeared in the courtroom in 1909, Lyda Conley was just the third woman, the second woman attorney, and the first Native American woman to argue a case in front of the Supreme Court.
Go her.
I know.
It's a big deal.
Lyda proved to be a very effective orator and compelled the court to listen to her every word. There's a part of her speech that gets quoted a lot, so I wanted to include this. When I shall be gathered unto my people, desire that they bury me with my fathers in Huron Cemetery, the most sacred and hallowed spot on earth to me. I cannot believe that this is superstitious reverence, any more than I can believe that the reverence every true American has for the grave of Washington at Mount Vernon is a superstitious reverence.
That's pretty brilliant.
I know, right? She's like, you guys revere this guy's place of burial. That you don't consider that superstitious.
Mm-hmm.
So why would you consider it mine?
Explain that. Tell me more.
And I guess the court was quite moved by this. They like really listened to her arguments and they found them pretty compelling. However, it wasn't enough.
Mm-hmm.
They upheld the lower court's dismissal of her case, and it was ruled that the cemetery could be sold. So she was not successful in her argument.
Mm-hmm.
But Lyda and Lena were like, still not moving.
Yeah, like, no.
So they continued to guard the grave of their mother. They would take turns, like just 24/7 guarding this grave. And in fact, over the years, federal marshals stormed the cemetery and destroyed the cabin where the two sisters watched over the graveyard. And undeterred, though, they would just rebuild it. And at least 2 more times this happened.
Wow.
So at least 3 times federal marshals came in, destroyed their little cabin, and then they rebuilt it and stayed there. Their ongoing battle continued to make news, which drew the attention of a senator named Charles Curtis, who was himself of Native descent. He introduced a bill in Congress that would ban the sale of the cemetery. And somehow he was able to get this passed.
Interesting.
So on February 13th, 1913, it was recommended that the Huron Place Cemetery become a national monument. And then it can't be destroyed.
Mm-hmm.
So the 2 sisters, though, were like, we still don't trust you people.
I can understand a healthy...
a healthy distrust.
Amount of doubt.
So they continued to guard it, even sometimes stopping, like there had been I think $10,000 had been set aside to improve it. And they were watching these people come in and they were like, you're fucking this up. And they would like send them away.
Ooh.
because they felt that they were disturbing the graves.
Mm-hmm.
Because as I said, a lot of them are in unmarked graves.
Mm-hmm.
There are some marked graves, including Lyda's family has marked graves there, but there were plenty of people who were buried with unmarked graves.
Yeah.
So the two sisters ended up being arrested multiple times, obviously.
Oh, shit.
And one time, Lyda chased some people out of the cemetery with a broomstick. So the judge...
They are really not having it.
I love this idea. So the judge gave her the choice of paying a $10 fine or serving a 10-day jail sentence.
She took the sentence, didn't she?
You know it. She went to jail. She was, at one point, I don't know if this is true or not, but she was accused of killing a police officer who trespassed. But I was like, I feel like she would have been in prison for that.
Yeah.
I don't think
that
they would
might be a little bit lore-ish.
I feel like it is. So Lena and Lyda watched over the cemetery for the rest of their lives. One night in May of 1946, Lyda was walking home from the library when someone jumped from the bushes, hit her in the head with a brick, and stole her purse.
Jeez.
She died within 24 hours. And it's said that her purse contained all of 20 cents.
Oh. Yikes.
So she was killed over 20 cents.
Mm-hmm.
Lyda was buried in that same cemetery next to her mother and her father and her two sisters by this time who had died. So now the only one who's left is Lena.
Mm-hmm.
Within a few months of Lyda's death, the Wyandot tribe of Oklahoma planned to move the graves and sell the land that Lyda had spent her whole life defending. But Lena was like, no, I'm staying.
Mm-hmm.
So she continued to watch over the cemetery. When she died in 1958, she was laid to rest next to Lyda. She warned those who tried to desecrate her grave on her tombstone.
Oh, jeez.
On her tombstone says, "Cursed be the villain that molest their graves."
Wow.
And she was said to have been put curses on people who were entering the cemetery, which I also love.
Yeah.
And all three of the sisters who, Sally died when she was a teenager, but the other three sisters never married and always lived together.
Wow.
So a year later, after Lena dies, the Wyandots of Kansas sued the United States and sued the Wyandots of Oklahoma. And once again, the courts sided against the preservation of the cemetery, but yet it still wasn't sold. So some kind of constant thing was always stopping them.
Mm-hmm.
By then, it was seen as a historic landmark. And in 1971, it was placed on the National Register of Historic Places. And in 2016, just a couple years ago, the cemetery's importance was cemented forever when it was named a National Historic Landmark. And it's since been renamed the Wyandot National Burying Ground. Lyda Conley will be forever remembered as a strong, independent, and ethical woman who fought for her people and preserved the dignity of her family for centuries to come. The arguments that she presented at the Supreme Court would eventually become the foundation of movements in the years to come, including the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act, which now protects burial grounds from being sold, stolen, or having artifacts removed.
Very cool.
The Wyandot National Burying Ground today serves as a physical reminder of the devastation and genocide of Native Americans across the country, but also their perseverance, integrity, and grit embodied by those who sacrificed their lives to preserve their culture and traditions.
That's really neat.
I used basically one article for all of this that was a very well-researched, incredible piece of literature called Trespassers Beware, Lyda Burton Conley and the Battle for Huron Place Cemetery by Kim Dayton in the Yale Journal of Law and Feminism. I also used Lyda Conley and the Battle for Wyandot Recognition by James Giago Davies for the Native Sun News, and Lyda Conley's legal argument to preserve the Huron Indian Cemetery from Wyand.org, and a Huron Cemetery Chronology by Janet English, the chief of the Wyandot Nation of Kansas, on wyand.nation.org.
Very cool. That is a really neat story.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And apparently at some point it was optioned to be made into a movie in 2008 or something, but I guess the movie must have fallen apart.
Yeah.
But Ben Kingsley was trying to get it made.
Very cool.
I would still love that to be a thing.
That would make a wonderful movie or play.
Yeah, it would be a really cool play.
It would be a really good play.
I wanted to include some sort of clip of someone talking about this, especially somebody from the Wyandot Nation of Kansas, but I didn't find anything. However, I did stumble across something really neat, which was there's a YouTube channel, and I don't know how, it's like Witkala Kawai or something like that, and it's a videos for kids to learn the Lakota language.
Very cool.
And so they have her story in Lakota.
That's really awesome.
Yeah.
I liked it. That was an awesome story.
Thanks. I like her.
Go, Lyda.
I like her with the shotgun.
With the broomstick.
And shotgun, the broomstick, just, and the
Whatever
other
gets the
sister
job
putting
done, man.
curses.
Shaking people down.
Yeah, I thought it was great.
So today I'm going to be talking about Susan La Flesche Picotte.
I think I know her.
I was wondering if you did.
I think she's on my list. She's Native American, isn't she?
She's the first Native American woman to become a doctor.
Yes.
Okay.
I've definitely read her entire thing, and I was going to do her, but I was like, there's so much.
There was so much.
I decided to put her off. I've done this like 4 times. I've like put her on my list and then put her off because the amount of information was so overwhelming that I was like, I'm just going to wait.
Yeah.
Let's do that for summertime.
I went through it and I picked out so that we wouldn't be here forever.
Yes.
Yeah.
There is so much.
It was some time and it was some reading. So Susan was born in June 1865 in a teepee on the Omaha Reservation in eastern Nebraska. Both her parents were multiracial and of European and Native American descent, but they culturally identified as Omaha since they were born and raised on the Omaha Reservation. And they both spoke Omaha as well. Her father, Joseph, who was also called Iron Eye, was of the Ponca tribe in Nebraska and also half French Canadian. He left the reservation to get an education in St. Louis, Missouri, but he returned, when he was done with his education, he returned to the reservation. Her father was actually adopted by the chief, Chief Young Elk, in 1853, and her dad was chosen as this chief's successor, so naming him like the principal leader of the Omaha tribe in 1855. Her mother's name was Mary Gale, and she was a mix of the Omaha, Otto, Iowa heritage. So Mary's father was an American Army surgeon, and she was the stepdaughter of a prominent fur trader. So her parents come from quite an impressive background.
Yeah.
So like Joseph, Mary identified as Omaha. She was fluent in French and English, but she refused to speak any other language than Omaha in their home.
Wow, that's great.
Yeah. Susan was the youngest of 4 girls.
We've got a trend happening.
I know, and she had one older half-brother. I was a little confused, but it seemed like obviously her dad had been married a couple times.
Okay.
Her parents insisted that Susan learn the tribe's traditional songs, their beliefs, customs, traditions, and the language in order to, like they said, retain her Omaha identity. But they felt strongly that these native rituals were not going to help her in the world that they were currently living in. They still wanted her to know them, but they wanted to make sure that she had even more kind of in her pocket. So they decided to send her to a Presbyterian mission school on the reservation. There she learned English and she became a devout Christian. Because of course that's what they always do on those reservations.
Yeah,
the assimilation.
The assimilation, which was based on what Australia did. So cool.
And we've talked about that before.
Yes.
This is kind of sad to me. They didn't give her an Omaha name because they didn't think that she would benefit from it.
You know, that's a similar thing that ends up happening sometimes to children of recent immigrants to the United States. They want their children, maybe not now as much.
Yeah.
But back in the day when people would immigrate here, they would want their children to be accepted as fully quote unquote American. So, I mean, you know, like that, like I remember having students who were like Vietnamese or Chinese or something, and their real names quote unquote real names would be like a traditional name, and then they would go by like Susie, which had nothing to do with their name.
Well, it's the same like in both sides of my family. My parents and their siblings all go by very Americanized names. My mom's name is San Juana. She goes by Jane.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, that's my mom's full name.
I thought her name was actually Jane.
No.
What about your name then?
My name it's Rita.
Okay.
Like I don't have a shortened or anything, but like my father-in-law, Carlos, everybody from back in the day calls him Charlie. And I'm like, oh, so how do you know Carlos? And they're like, oh, me and Charlie go back to, and yeah, so he went as Charlie.
He went by Charlie?
Yeah, and like Jose, they go as Joe.
Oh, yeah. And it always like makes me a little sad.
It is. It's that I understand, but it still doesn't stop sucking.
Yeah, it doesn't erase the fact that like there was a concerted effort to try to like not be who you are.
Yeah, and I understand,
or at least not be recognizable.
I understand where her parents were coming from there. Though. Yeah, it's like they were living through a time where they were being wiped out. And so it's like, how do we get them to how do we get these generations to survive?
It's all about survival, right? Like if your name is like some unpronounceable native name on a sheet of paper when you're applying for a job, or this other person's name is Susan.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, racism exists. We live here.
Oh, yeah. They actually prevented her too from receiving traditional tattoos that go across the women's foreheads.
Oh yeah, that would make sense.
Yeah. She spoke Omaha with her parents, but her father and her oldest sister, Suzette, encouraged her to speak English outside the house and with her other siblings. So only Omaha with mom and dad.
Yeah, and well, that's, again, very similar to the immigrant experience for a lot of people who can speak their, home, like, language at home, but not out in the public.
Which is very sad.
Yeah.
So Iron Eagle sought to help his people he encouraged the assimilation because he really did believe that it was necessary for them to adapt to the white ways so that they could survive. And he caused a stir with the Omaha people because he was participating in that land allotment.
Oh, that we talked about.
Yes.
Yeah, with the lawyer.
Yeah.
Who argued in front of the Supreme Court.
So the allotments are, as Amanda knows, it's like those acres of land that get held and then auctioned off piece by piece, or allowing people to come and live on them. It's not their land.
Well, it's supposed to be. The idea was you get this little spot over here, you get this spot. But then if you were not living on that land, then it would be up for auction, or people could just literally move onto it. White people, obviously.
Yeah.
Could just move onto it and start it and call it theirs. Yep. It was real shitty.
So he was kind of allowing this to happen and not trying to stir the water, and people obviously were getting upset. At 8 years old, Susan was assisting her mother at the bedside of an elderly Native woman. The woman was extremely sick and she needed medical attention. The doctor had been called 4 times, and each time he said that he was on his way. He never came, and the woman died in extreme pain and discomfort. And Susan said that even as a young girl, the message was clear. It was only an Indian.
Ugh.
And that sparked something inside Susan that she said one day she wanted to heal the fellow members of her Omaha tribe. This is a quote from Susan. She said, "It has always been a desire of mine to study medicine ever since I was a small girl, for even then I saw the need of my people for a good physician." Because like the white doctors wouldn't even want to touch the Native people.
Oh, I know. There was like this perception that they were dirty.
Yeah.
It was the racism.
Yeah. There was, doing this research, there was such a focus on hygiene. And it was just like almost to the point where it was like, you're dirty, you're dirty, you're dirty.
When you say that, who was such a focus? What are you referring to?
We'll get into it.
Okay.
So at the age of 14, she was sent east to attend an all-girls school in Elizabeth, New Jersey, to be followed by the school called Virginia's Hampton Institute, where she took classes with children of former slaves and other Native American children. She graduated from the Hampton Institute on May 20th, 1886, where she was the class salutatorian.
Salutatorian.
Salutatorian? What is that?
Number 2.
Number 2?
Valedictorian is number 1. Salutatorian is number 2.
That's what I figured. She was awarded the De Morris Prize, which was given to the graduating senior who received the highest scores in their exams. A lot of the graduates from that school, especially the women, were encouraged to teach or to return to the reservation, and especially for the women, be good wives, go to church, have babies.
What was that we were talking about the other day? Like, women had the options of like being a teacher, a nurse, a secretary, and that was basically it.
A or B, where do you want to go? She decided she wanted to apply to medical school.
Go get it.
Yeah. So Elizabeth Blackwell was the first woman to receive a medical degree. Mm-hmm. This was in 1849. This, talking about Susan applying to medical school, is 45 years later.
Yeah.
And it's still very rare for women to be doing this.
Of course it is.
Yeah. So in the late 19th century, only a few schools accepted women as medical students. And so Susan applied and was accepted to one of them. It was the Women's Medical College of Pennsylvania, the WMCP, which was established in 1850 and one of, I believe it was 3 medical schools on the East Coast that would allow women.
You know, what's funny is we both had women who were in Pennsylvania.
Yeah. There's that thread. So medical school was expensive, and Susan could not afford it on her own. So she turned to a family friend of hers named Alice Fletcher. Alice was a ethnographer. Have you ever heard that term?
Yeah, those are the people who like mapped ethnicities. Yeah,
it's a branch of anthropology which links to sociology, and it's a detailed observation of people in their natural environment.
Yeah. It was often real shitty.
Yeah.
Like, not everybody who did it was shitty, but it was a lot of what ended up coming out of the people who did those studies was shitty. It was like eugenics.
Yeah.
It was real bad. They'd be like, see, I told you, people of color are dumb.
Yeah.
Like, they had their brain is smaller. Like, it was.
Yep.
It was real terrible.
So this family friend of hers, Alice, had connection with a lot of women's reform organizations. And Susan had once helped nurse Alice back to health when she had a flare-up of inflammatory rheumatism. So Alice felt like it was her turn to help Susan. So she helped Susan appeal to the Women's National Indian Association. And Susan sent in writing her desire to enter the homes of people as a physician and teach them hygiene as well as curing their ills. So this group, I don't know how I feel about this group. It was a group of white women that were sitting on this platform, and they were handing out scholarships and they were handing out help, but it was for the fact that they could say, see, the white people are helping these people become good citizens in the world. Like it.
Well, it also feels very like patronizing.
Very.
Like, I'm going to give you this money, but now you're going to do this thing I want you to do. And if you don't do this thing I want you to do, you won't get the money.
Yeah.
Like, it's pretty gross.
And this group was really intense on, they wanted to teach Native women hygiene and and like a lot of domestic stuff. So like how to properly present yourself and how to sew and how to do, like, to act more Americanized in that way, put a corset on and sit in a chair and embroider kind of thing.
The hygiene thing, I think I understand. Because there was this movement in the United States at the time.
Okay.
Where suddenly we understood that you should wash your hands in order to prevent the spread of disease.
Yes.
So that education wasn't necessarily getting everywhere it needed to go.
Okay, so they needed people to be communicating and teaching these tactics.
Yeah, I mean, it's similar to like, we take for granted that like we can just walk into a grocery store and buy tampons.
True.
And there are places still in the world where that's like having a period by itself means that you have to go sit in a period hut for 7 days and bleed all over yourself because they think it's gross and weird.
Yeah.
It's just that kind of like, I'm not saying that that's what was but there's this idea here that like if you just understood that this was totally normal, maybe you wouldn't feel this way. But there's still like, I think this is such a touchy subject because what we think is quote unquote right or correct or normal doesn't mean that it is for anyone else.
Yeah.
And I think it's a good idea to tell people to wash their hands. I think it's just, in general, I feel
that
like
should be practiced.
that's just like, everybody can learn that, and I don't feel weird about it. Wash your hands. Don't get pink eye from my dog.
Yeah. Well, her dog does have pink eye right now.
It's gross.
So this association also requested that she remain single during her time in medical school.
See, now, I don't like this. Like, you don't get to tell people how to live their life.
Yeah.
Just because you're giving them money.
Yeah. So she did in order to stay in school. And for several years after her graduation, she stayed single in order to focus on her practice.
Mm-hmm.
So in school, she studied chemistry, anatomy, physiology, histology, pharmaceutical science, obstetrics, and general medicine. She did clinical work at facilities in Philadelphia, and she was doing these both alongside men and other women, which I think is really cool. There was a note in there while attending medical school, she decided to change her appearance slightly, in the way that she dressed, in the way that she did her hair, in the way that she presented herself. She said she wanted to be like them. She wanted to look like them.
Okay.
So that they would accept her.
So what does that mean? How did she change? What did she do?
Well, the way that they said it, she tightened back her hair. She wore the style that the white girls were wearing. And so she was trying to fit in that way. I don't think she changed appearance in a way of like changing her features.
No, I thought maybe you were saying like she dyed her hair or something like that. But still, if that's not how you would have dressed, I don't know. That's a hard one though. Like I think like once you become part of a different cultural group, whether that's moving somewhere or whatever, you just sort of start looking different. Like when I moved to Bozeman,
true.
Where I grew up in Montana, everybody wore like Levi's and cowboy boots and whatever. And I never did. That was just not how I dressed. And when I moved to Bozeman, everybody wore like Carhartts and flannels and outdoor gear and whatever. And I definitely liked that look.
It's like when I arrived at school freshman year and everyone had Adidas. And I was like, I guess I need to go to Adidas.
Yeah. So some of that's like, I think a natural part of becoming a different group, like being in a different group. But then some of it is obviously based in racism
and trying to fit in.
Yeah. And wanting to assimilate.
Yeah. Which, I mean, her parents had encouraged her to do.
Yeah, everybody did, it sounded like.
So while in her second year of school, there was a huge measles outbreak back at home on where she's from on her reservation. Susan immediately went back home to see if she could help. It was seriously contagious. So that was a huge risk for her to do that, to come and help provide aid. Luckily, while she was providing aid, she didn't get measles. So thank goodness. She was able to return to school and keep up with her studies. And she actually kept in contact with her tribe through letters, still giving them medical advice. And so they would write her and say this and this and this happened. So she was helping them through letters, which I think is pretty nice. She went on to graduate at the top of her class of 36 women on March 14th, 1889, and she was named valedictorian. After graduating, she applied for the position of government physician in Omaha Agency Indian School.
Yeah.
She received the job 2 months later. And it kind of seemed like from what I was reading that as she was applying for the job, they had heard of her and they were getting ready to offer her the job. So like kind of crossed paths in that way, which I think is really neat. Couldn't you imagine going in for an interview and they're like, oh yeah, we were
going to pick you. Thanks for coming in.
Thanks for coming in. You got the job. This too, part of the organization that gave her the money to go to school. They asked her to go on a speaking tour at the request of the Connecticut Indian Association to make a presentation assuring white audiences that Indians could benefit from white civilization. Right?
No.
So not like you said, I'm going to give you this money.
And now you have to do this thing.
And now you have to do this thing.
This thing where I am the hero.
Yeah.
That white savior complex is strong in this one.
Yep. So she keeping ties with the association, and she went on the speaking tour. They further sponsored her by funding the purchase of medical instruments for her, books for her, and kind of getting her on her feet when she was in her first years of practicing.
I am so conflicted about this shit.
Me too.
Like, if they hadn't been helping her, she couldn't have done good things. But the help that they're offering is really,
It's
like,
tainted
it's
in a way.
dirty.
Yeah.
I don't like it.
Yeah.
I'm
sure she didn't like it either.
Well, and I kind of wonder about that. Like, we're looking back on this from a 21st century lens where we understand a lot more.
True.
She might have just thought these are really benevolent people. I don't know. It's hard to say. Like,
Without her
compared to the ones who are
down.
killing Native Americans, like, at least there's.
This is a whirlwind of emotion.
It is. It's really awful. I hate it.
She ended up being the sole doctor for 1,244 patients that spread over a territory of about 13,000 square miles.
Whoa. That is a lot of territory to cover.
So she made house calls, and they were tedious and tiresome. She would push herself sometimes for 20-hour work days.
Ugh.
She would wrap herself in her buffalo robe and drive her buggy through the snow, sometimes through sub-zero winds with her two mares. The mares' names were Pat and Pudge, which I love.
I'm glad that you went into your research enough to know what the horses' names were. That's really like #Rita.
But could you imagine just like most of that time is spent in travel?
Oh, that would be awful.
It's
like,
not even like she has someone driving her where maybe she could take a nap.
Being from rural Montana and understanding what that really means in terms of the weather and how far apart everything is, like, I feel that in my literal bones. I feel that cold and that traveling. It'd just be awful.
She became known as Dr. Sue, and her office hours never ended. Even when she slept, she would leave a lantern in her window so that if anybody needed help, they knew that they were welcome.
Oh, that's really great.
One of her main platforms was hygiene and illness prevention.
Mm-hmm.
She also believed strongly in the healing power of fresh air and sunshine. She openly spoke out against white men selling whiskey, drawing attention to the fact that they were purposely preying on tribe members.
Mm-hmm.
As
they were. They really were.
They really were, yeah. People, like some of the elders and most people did not trust the white doctors.
As they shouldn't?
No, and they would flock to Susan because not only was she one of them, she spoke their language.
Yeah, I mean, like, obviously.
Yeah. In 1894, Susan married Henry Picotte. He was a Sioux from South Dakota, and the two had 2 boys. At that time, Susan was expected to become a full-time mom and a homemaker, and she broke that stereotype by staying full-time at her job.
Well, if she had decided to become a stay-at-home mom, that's fine. But who would those people have for a doctor?
Yeah.
White guys who are probably going to not give a shit and let them die anyway.
Give them proper care.
God, no good. No, thank you.
She did suffer a constant struggle with her decision, though. She was really torn between serving those people in her community and taking care of her husband and her children. She had a constant fear of spreading herself too thin and not being the best doctor, mother, and a wife that she possibly could be.
That sounds like it could have been written about 2020.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know a woman who works like a long, high-powered job or whatever who also doesn't feel like they're sacrificing some of their time with their family.
Mm-hmm.
And
they're not enough in any aspect.
And I just don't think men have to very often. I think it's getting better, but especially then, men didn't have to face that choice.
No, there was no choice. There was one way.
Yeah. And it was acceptable to not be around.
Sadly, too, things at her home started to fall apart. Her husband actually began to struggle with alcoholism. He contracted tuberculosis, and combined with excessive drinking, he died in 1905, leaving Susan a widow with their 2 small boys. She was only 40 at this time.
That is the year that Margaret McFarland was born.
Really?
Can you imagine these two having overlapping lives? Because like her story sounds like it could be a million years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And by her I mean Susan's. Like Margaret's sounded very now.
Yeah.
It is really bizarre
That they're in the same lifetime?
Yes, that they had overlapping lives.
Yeah.
Because, we're talking about him dying of tuberculosis in 1905.
Mm-hmm. And she was born in 1905?
Yeah. Wow. In a suburb of Pittsburgh.
Wow.
Right? Like this is like gigantically different.
Drastic stories.
And it just goes to show that you can be living in the same country and have like the amount of wealth and technology that the East Coast had versus where everyone else lived.
True.
It's just different. It's so mind-boggling to me.
After her husband's death, Susan began suffering from chronic pain and respiratory issues. She didn't let it slow her down, though. She helped build and open a hospital near Walthill, Nebraska in 1903. This was the first facility to be built on a reservation land without any support from the federal government.
Oh, that's amazing.
First one ever. She established that hospital. She said it was open to anyone that was ill, no matter their age, no matter their gender, no matter their skin color. She also became a political advocate for the Omaha people. Many of the natives were being financially taken advantage of.
Mm-hmm.
And like we said, with the land allotments and things like that, she actually helped draw attention to illegal land sales. And she even traveled to D.C. to speak as a representative of her people. Her health continued to decline. And in March 1915, she was diagnosed. She was suffering from a bone cancer, which is another shadow.
Yeah, very similarity.
She ended up dying on September 18th, 1915. She was only 53 years old.
That's quite young.
Her service was held the next day, and she was buried in Bancroft Cemetery in Nebraska. She was next to her husband, her father, her mother, and her sisters, and her brother, who had all passed away before her.
Oh, my God.
So she lost all of those people during this time.
Yeah, her whole family.
Yeah. Her son, Carl Picotte, he actually got a career with the U.S. Army, and he served in World War II. She had another son, Pierre, who stayed in Nebraska for his whole life, and he raised his family with 3 kids there. Susan's hospital in Walthill, Nebraska is still there today, and it's a community center. It's named after her and was actually declared a National Historic Landmark in 1993. However, doing a little bit more research, I found the facility because I wanted to see what it looked like. And in 2018, the hospital was named one of 11 of the most endangered places in 2018. Like that's falling apart.
Oh, so it hasn't been kept up. It
hasn't been kept up. And so I read an article that said they had put a new roof on and it wasn't totally sealed up. And they had these heavy rains that the roof is literally, it's like a bomb dropped through it because you know how it gets wet and then it just breaks.
Caves in.
And then all of the walls are just stained and the place is in disarray.
Oh, that's disappointing.
So there actually is a website that I found. It is the drsusancenter.org, and they are raising money to fix the facility. They were just recently, I think it was October of last year, given a $50,000 grant, which is going to help restore her hospital. But also on that website, you can donate to that facility. Mm-hmm. And the facility is a place for Omaha people. It gives resources and things for them to be able to reach out to.
Well, we'll make sure to put the link to the website on our Facebook and in our Instagram in the comments.
Yes. There's also an elementary school in western Omaha, Nebraska that's named after her. On her 152nd anniversary of her birth, she was the Google Doodle. Google Doodle.
The Google Doodle.
The Google Doodle.
I love Google Doodle, though.
And a bust of Susan was dedicated at the Martin Luther King Jr. Transportation Center in Sioux City. So I got most of my information from Wikipedia. History.com, there is... it's called Remembering the First Native American Doctor by Christopher Klein. The article that I read about her her hospital being in disarray was from the SiouxCityJournal.com. And I got a lot of information from a book written by Joe Starita. It's called A Warrior of the People: How Susan LaFlesche Overcame Racial and Gender Inequality to Become America's First Indian Doctor.
Lovely. I'm so glad you did her so that I can cross her off the list. Because for real, so there I have probably like 4 women that are on my like rotation where every week I'm like, I'm going to do her, but I'm like, oh, I don't have time to do that much research. So I'm really grateful you did that because she's so important.
She is very important, and she dedicated her life to just the betterment of her people, which I always admire people who their fingers, their works reach far and wide because of the amount of people that they help. That goes on for generations.
Yeah, for sure.
Just like your lady.
Yeah, Margaret McFarland. Mm-hmm. I'm really happy with our girls today.
Me too.
With our ladies.
Well, I hope you enjoyed. If this episode was new for you, yay. Just keep your eyes peeled on our social media. We will be back with new episodes. We're just on pause right now while Amanda gets well and while we're in lockdown. Sending out all the good vibes for you out there. Hopefully you're staying healthy and happy and taking all the necessary precautions. Check out our Patreon if you haven't already. It's you can access it in our link tree in our Instagram profile. Also, I'd like to thank Lucas McIntyre, our editor, for putting this special episode together. And also thank you to Jennifer Finch for our awesome theme song. Till next time, guys.